Communication is something every one of us does every single day, but very few of us have actually been taught how to do it well. Whether you're interviewing a witness, leading a team, having a difficult conversation with your spouse, or just trying to get through a disagreement without making it worse, the difference usually isn't what you say, it's how well you listen, regulate your emotions, and understand the person across from you. In this episode, we're talking about the communication mistakes almost all of us make, why active listening isn't nearly as common as we think, and how better conversations can completely change our relationships, our leadership, and even the outcome of investigations.
This is the Truth Be Told podcast, where we unlock the secrets of strategic communication.
My guest today is Alex Perry, CEO of Practically Speaking, a TEDx speaker, author, and communication coach who has spent her career helping people find their voice, quite literally. Before coaching executives and leadership teams, Alex spent nearly 2 decades as a speech-language pathologist, helping people regain the ability to communicate after illness and injury. Today, she combines that scientific background with emotional intelligence, storytelling, and practical strategies to help leaders communicate with confidence and connect more effectively. In this conversation, we dive into why active listening isn't something we're born knowing how to do, the difference between empathy and sympathy and compassion, how to regulate your emotions when conversations get difficult, and why so many of us think we're better at reading the room than we actually are. This episode is full of practical takeaways and some funny stories about what happens when communication completely goes off the rails. Let's get into the talk. Welcome to this episode of the Truth Be Told podcast. I am your host, Dave Thompson. I am here with communication expert, Alex Perry. I know, I labeled you, so now we can't miscommunicate for the next 45 to 60 minutes.
You increased the pressure by tenfold and my palms are sweaty.
Yeah.
Extra's a hefty title.
Yeah. Well, although I feel like to be a communication expert, it means you have to be comfortable screwing up communication. What does that sound right?
Yes. Yes, 100%. The reason why you can carry that title is because you've messed it up enough, for sure.
Yeah. I know the guest just learned a little bit about your background, and you started as a speech pathologist, and now you're coaching and training all sorts of folks, but a lot of people in the executive space.
Correct.
And so I'm excited today because we've got a lot of listeners that some are from the investigative world, right? So they're talking about some really difficult conversations, which I know is a topic that you speak and do some keynotes on. And then we just have people who, have to interact with other people all day, every day, like in a relationship or a business setting or whatever else. And communication is a bit of a gap there. So I'm excited to talk to you about some of the myths that exist out there and how we can just better engage with each other. But my first question is to keep this kind of simple. How often do you feel like, there's a problem that exists that's maybe solvable, but communication is the reason we can't solve it? So it's not the problem itself. It's not the behavior itself. It's not the issue. It's the way that we are engaging with somebody about it.
So how often does that occur?
Yeah.
Only every day, almost all the time.
Yeah.
Almost all the time.
I just think I ask it because I feel like whether it's in the executive world or an investigative world, sometimes we get so stuck on the issue, somebody's performance, somebody did something that upset us, whatever it is. And the real issue is we can't figure out how to talk about it.
Yes. Yeah. We can't figure out how to talk about it, or we're using two vastly different communication styles. And we're so, and for lack of a better word, triggered by the other person's style that we can't hear them. This is, for example, my marriage, right? So my husband has a very different style than I do. So when he says something, he's like, well, I'm saying the same thing you're saying. I'm like, you're absolutely not saying the same thing I'm saying.
Right.
Not even possible. Couldn't possibly that we agree on this. But the words or the phrasing or the facial expressions, they don't match what I would want. So...
Well, I think good people misunderstand each other all the time. And especially, you mentioned relationships, so you brought it up already, not me.
All
but
right.
I think, what about text messaging? We live in a world where communication is no longer just sitting face to face or having a one-to-one meeting in the same room. But I think of if somebody sent me a message and asked, is everything okay? And I said, I'm fine, versus I sent somebody a message and says everything okay, and they say, I'm fine, that might mean two very different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Now prepare for the rant that I have on text
Go for it.
messaging as
Carry
a
on.
form of communication. It was never designed to be the communication channel that we use it for today. It was designed to be able to leave a message and come back to it later, much like email. So when we start to reflect our own, right, project our own tone or our own interpretation on someone else's written communication, I mean, that is such a problem for everybody, for everyone. The passive aggressive period. Like if I text my kid and she's like, I can't believe what's wrong? You put a period at the end of that. I'm like, nothing. I just like punctuation and I come from a different generation.
Uh-huh.
But we move so fast that we don't allow for any space, any space or opportunity for real communication to happen.
And if you put 3 dots, 3 periods at the
Yeah.
end, then it's like, what else are you thinking that you didn't want to communicate?
You didn't want to communicate. Like
Right. What's the
you have
afterthought?
trailed off. And that's
Yeah.
not helpful. In my opinion, that's not helpful. So pick up
Yeah.
pick up the phone.
Right. Right. Well, that's what I want to dive into, all these different areas. And I'm curious from you, because you're working with such a wide range of people. What are some of the maybe the top pain points that you see if you get brought in by an organization or C-suite to say, hey, come talk to our leadership team. We're struggling with blank. What do you see are some of the biggest pain points that people have in this space?
Giving feedback and having hard conversations. So, and I'm here in the Midwest, so there is very much a prevalence of what I would consider to be nice versus kind. And many people have, I don't know, were you taught when you went into the workforce about how to give feedback in a way that could be heard by the other person? Or were you taught any type of way to have a hard conversation? Most people have not
Yeah,
been.
that's a good point. Yeah, especially now.
Mm-hmm. No, they simply don't know. And so they only have the models that have come before them. So if you've had great models, great, you know how to do that. But if you're like most of the world, you have managers that were put into management position without any training. They were good at their job. Then they got promoted to manager. They don't know what they're doing, but you're my manager, so I'm going to model after you because surely you know what you're doing. And it just becomes, right, a perpetuation of not great behavior that almost then feeds into the culture of an organization. And I can give you an example of what that looks like.
Yeah,
So,
go for it. Because I think the people giving critical feedback or even positive feedback, it seems like such a scary thing for somebody to do.
yes, it feels like a scary thing to do. And so I have an organization where they believe very firmly in grace, like we should give someone grace. And I'm in favor of grace. There's nothing wrong with grace. However, when grace becomes, first of all, when it's not asked for or we're not sure that the person actually needs it, then we're potentially enabling bad behavior. So you've got to think about, does this person actually need and want grace, or do they need someone to come alongside them and offer, hey, this is what we're seeing. What help do you need? But that feels too scary for them or has felt too scary for them. So working them through the process that we actually were at our best in communication when we make the attempt, even if it's messy, ugly, and hard, you can always go back and repair it. So I see a lot of folks fall into that kind of binary thinking when it comes to communications. Like it's going to be great or I'm going to get fired.
Right.
And there's no in between that says, well, there's a lot of variations to how this conversation can go. And most of them are not that bad.
And not addressing the issue is going to make it worse. I think people forget that all the time, right? It's kind of like, in a leadership role, sometimes people get paralyzed to make a decision. And not making the decision is going to be even worse than probably making the wrong decision. But to me, the same thing happens in this feedback loop. And I use this example on another episode, but it's like feedback. If you had bad breath, or if you were at an event and you had like something in your teeth, you really want somebody to tell you. You want somebody who cares about you to say, hey, FYI, you got something going on there in the top tooth. But nobody wants to be that person to give that feedback or say it. And to me, it's the same thing in the business world. Is like if you are underperforming or your boss isn't happy with something, you would rather know about it so you can address it, but nobody wants to provide that because it's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. Fear, right? Fear of the other person's reaction, fear of how you're going to be perceived as a leader, fear that, again, the worst case catastrophic moment is going to occur when in fact 99% of the time it doesn't happen.
In that case, and then I think not just in the professional world, but I know, for both of our worlds that we've come from, you got people talking to other people that may not have much in common with each other. Right. So we're talking to people from different backgrounds, different life experiences, generations. In today's workspace, you've got people geographically, not even, maybe never even met each other in person. So how often are you dealing with that, or any thoughts around interacting with people that just are not, don't have the same kind of commonalities with or learned experiences together?
Yeah. So I do see it all the time. I work with teams that are remote and have to your point, have never met in person. And so what I think is important, this is our opportunity to increase intentionality just that much more. So no, we can't all be in a room together, but we could take the first 5 minutes of the meeting to just talk,
Right.
and be curious. It's all the same, right? The things that we know, but we forget only every day. So be curious. Don't make an assumption, which is really tough to do. Right? Because we're launched into people's lives, right? Right? Like right now, you're looking in my personal office, and we just get launched into somebody's life.
Right.
Start immediately, you're like, well, what about this? And what about that? What about this?
Right.
But turning anything that might feel like judgment or an assumption into curiosity, which
Yeah.
is the superpower, as through the work that you do.
Yeah, I think a good reminder that our podcast is viewable on video, on YouTube and Spotify. But it's funny because as I'm looking at you when we first connected, but before we recorded, you got all these marathon medals behind you, right? And so that could be a trigger to ask a question, or you can make an assumption, or it's one of those things. It's like, okay, is this when I'm dialed into your background, it can be, okay, maybe she's an active runner and she wants to talk about it because she's proud. It happens to be behind her. Or maybe she used to run all the time and had some terrible injury and now can't run anymore. And I don't want to trauma them. Maybe that's not a thing to talk about. But there's so much that goes on when you're right. You're kind of in somebody's living space now, the way that we communicate.
Yeah. But what a cool opportunity. So what a cool opportunity to learn more about someone. And when we know more about people, it makes it easier to work with them.
Right. Have you had a time where you've been brought in to work with clients where you felt like, hey, this is not a culture or a group that I have much in common with, and now you're in a position of, consulting and coaching, and somehow have to get credibility and buy-in, and they're like, who, I just don't belong here.
Yeah. So take Alex, right? Take me and put me in a room full of asphalt professionals or construction guys. And, I'm the only, or maybe there's one or two other females, but they probably have a demeanor that's different than mine. So there have definitely been those moments where I have walked in and thought, there's no way. I'm a positive person. I'm smiling. I'm laughing. I'm all these things. How on earth am I going to get to know these guys? But that's actually the mechanism for getting to know them, because they're not expecting me to be anything different than what I am. And in fact, if I mirror and match who they are, then I come off, and I've done this. So, right, I come off looking robotic and unapproachable and I'm I'm just there to punish them for what they're doing. Like, here's how you communicate better, instead of actually just communicating with them, which is this simple thing to do, but it's hard to remember when you're preparing to teach a session or when you're doing a keynote or you're having a meeting. It's hard to remember that your best option is to show up as who you are. You can always make improvements, but don't alter your style so much that you don't show up as an authentic human.
Yeah, that's a really good takeaway. So you didn't wear a hard hat when you show up to some of these? Because that could help.
No. I don't. I would if they told me to, but I did learn to wear jeans, and I came from a culture where you're expected to dress up. So shifting that I walked in, like, here's a horror story. If you ever want a horror story, I walked in to do a group training, and this is my fault, right? I was like, "Oh, well, they do healthcare," and so I wore what I thought was a really nice, like, healthcare-y outfit, and I'm like,
Sure.
"Oh, my hair looks like" I'm so focused on me, it's disgusting, right? And I'm like and I'm in there, and I'm talking about executive presence, and I'm like, "You need to be neat and clean and polished," and there's this woman in the back of the room, and she's just looking at me, and you know when you speak and you can tell you that you've made someone mad? Like, you could
Mhm.
actually tell. Like,
Daily.
they are
Sure.
yeah, they're shooting daggers at you, and she's sitting there, and she crosses her arms, and she's just staring at me, and I'm still talking because the show must go on, and she goes to raise her hand, and I'm like, "Yes, a question. Get over yourself, Alex."
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and she looks at me, and she says, "Are you telling me that in order to do my job well, I've gotta dress like you?" So then I stumble through, and I, like, puke up some subpar answer that's not great, and I talked to her afterwards at the break. I was like, "Tell me more about what that question meant," and she said, "I don't think you really researched real hard about what kind of healthcare we do," and I was like, "Well, tell me more about what you mean," and she said, "Well, we work with Medicaid clients, and we do home health." She goes, "If I walk into a house dressed like you are, I will never have their trash. They will not feel safe around me." And I thought, "Oh my gosh." And that is a moment that re-taught me how to approach talking about things like your presence, because
Yeah.
your presence really depends on what does the person in front of you need.
Yeah, what a good example. Now, also, she could have asked the question a little nicer and put a little redirection here, but
Thanks for defending me.
yeah, I mean, come on, you don't gotta do it on stage. But I gotta ask you this because it can be so tough. Like, people think you and I talked about earlier about how I used to have a just terrible fear of public speaking. I used to hate it. Now I love it, and that's all I wanna do it all the time. And it's, one part is, like, the unpredictable can be a little scary, and you get
Yeah.
a question like that. Um, how do you, because I can see the immediate, like, either anxiety somebody could have as the speaker or defensiveness.
Yeah.
How do you manage that emotion on a stage or whatever platform in front of all these people?
Well, much like you, it's taken time and practice and experience. You have to go through it. It must happen so you can learn. But it's the simplest thing, the hardest thing, which is to pause and let it sit for a second or two, which feels like 400 minutes when you're on a stage. And then you have a couple of options from there. One is you can lean in and get curious depending on the group. The other thing you can do is say, "Thanks for that question. I'll talk with you afterwards," right? All the things that they're easy to say, but they're hard to incorporate until you've had to do it. But that's usually where I go, is just give it a second. And also, I have never found, and we can argue about this if you want. I don't argue with people anymore. I used to try to really prove my point in front of an audience, but I don't do that anymore because I find that it takes away from all the people who were actually into the point that I was making.
Yeah, I
It
agree.
yeah.
And it gets exhausting to win arguments all the time. So,
Yes.
once in a while. Yeah, no. Yeah, same thing. I mean, and it looks terrible, right? I've been there because
Yeah.
it can be frustrating when you get brought in to give people thought leadership and advice, and then somebody's challenging everything you're saying. But fighting about it is silly. Right. The end goal for me is I got to the point of, like, I just want people to think different. Maybe they
Yes.
don't buy into it. Maybe they're not going to do exactly what I said, but if they at least cause them to think differently afterwards, I've accomplished my mission. And there's nothing wrong with you as the speaker thinking different afterwards too. Like your example, when you
Mhm.
get these questions or perspectives, like, oh, I can bring that up in my next training, right? I can adapt that as well.
Yeah.
But it can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think that we are taught early on that the person at the front of the room has to have all the answers. That they are like, you saw my hands start to sweat, like, I started sweating where you're like, "You're the expert." And I'm like, "Please don't
Right.
make me the expert."
Right, right.
Yeah, but we're like, that's instilled in us very early on. And so, what I find with a lot of folks, it's unwinding that and letting them you can be both an expert and a learner. You can be both the person in the room who is doing the facilitation, and you can let someone else lead for a moment if that's what the group needs. But that takes a lot because it's very systematic in our world that, elementary school, you have teachers, and you get to work and you have leaders, and the leaders have all the answers, and the leaders are the ones to do the things. And that's a hard mentality to break if you're not around people who demonstrate something different.
Yeah, I can think of just one. Well, I'm sure there's plenty of times I've screwed up on a stage, but I can think of one specific time where I just had enough with somebody because when, like you said, if you start an argument or a back and forth, you're taking away from everybody else that wants to be there for whatever you're trying to preach about.
Yes.
And I had this one class where this guy, I swear everything I said, he had to raise his hand. Not correct, but he was like an add-on guy. So he'd be like, oh, that's a good point. And let me echo and let me piggyback everything. And it was fine. I let it go. And then after a while, though, every time he raised his hand, the rest of the room was now rolling the eyes and was now like, okay. And now it's taking away from the point that they're there. So I pulled him aside during the break and shared, how his experience is probably greater than others in the room. And I want to make sure they have the space. None of that mattered. So finally, he raised his hand again, and as his hand was up, I just walked over and handed, in his open hand, I just gave him the PowerPoint clicker and said, here's all you need. You can just teach the rest of the day. And that was, it was probably a little sassy, but the rest of the room needed it. And we needed some levity at that point because we're like, okay, we got to move on. But I would recommend not doing that, I think, is the advice.
Well, what I'm hearing is that you did the other steps first, right? You tried to meet his need because don't you think that a lot of that, right? It's just human behavior. He's looking to get his need met in that class. And his need in that moment is greater than everybody else's. And sometimes you can feed that need a little bit. And then sometimes, like you said, you got to hand him the clicker. That's
you
great.
Need a boundary. Yeah. He did not take the clicker. And that was the last question he asked for the day. So I'm not sure if my evaluation was super positive from that individual, but that's okay. What are you going to do? One of the things when you talked about, did I go through training or experience on how to give feedback and receive feedback, which hopefully a lot of people are listening to. The other thing that people struggle with is listening. I feel like I'm 90 years old saying this, but I feel like it's even worse now in the newest generation in the workforce. But I don't know if it's just attention deficit, if it's the way that people digest information now is in such short form, but I don't know. And is active listening just a buzzword, or is that something that we're still actually focused on trying to improve in the workplace?
Great question. Depends on the workplace. And it could be that all of these factors, right? More technology, more in life coming at us is impacting our ability to listen. However, I question whether or not listening is ever taught to begin with. So go all the way back to when you were in preschool. Someone sat you down and said, listen. And that was your instruction in listening. And then you had to pick up context clues as to what it actually meant to listen and pay attention. So very few of us, now your audience obviously are all trained, skilled listeners. You have to be in order to do the work that you do. But for the rest of the world, when I ask a leadership group or an audience, how many people have actually been trained in listening? Very few have. So to even begin that process of this is what listening and listening well looks like, and that there's different types of listening based on the situation they're in. My take is that we are missing from the very get-go the opportunity to help people be better at communication. Period.
Yeah. There's a couple of things there. Like even I'm picturing my nephews, so 6 and 8 years old right now. And even if it's like, hey, listen, and you tell them something, the response is, or okay, I got it. Versus maybe, hey, explain back to me. What did you just hear? What did that mean? And actually teach somebody what listening is. But even if you want to compliment our listeners, I guarantee right now, if you are pretending to listen at some point during this or any other episode, and I do this all the time. You just listen to 20 minutes of a podcast and you have absolutely no idea what just
Nope.
happened. What is it? How does that happen? It happens whether it could be listening to a podcast, it could be driving somewhere and your GPS has told you to turn 15 times and you just are oblivious to what it has told you. What do you think that's about? Well, we're listening, but we're not really engaged.
Well, yeah, that's attention. Right. So when you think about how attention works, there's different forms. We have sustained attention, which is what's required for active listening. So sustained attention, no distractions, no driving, no, like you are actually looking at another person and you are listening. Then there's divided attention, which says I'm doing two things at once. And contrary to what most people believe, multitasking is not real. That is not something that we are capable of doing. So your attention is actually divided and you're not giving full to either thing that you're doing. So
Yeah. Any advice then? So if I'm the leader listening, or if I'm going, whether it's an investigative interview, it's a public speaking, or it's a difficult conversation, how do I get in the right mindset? Because sometimes you think like, okay, I've got this call from 2 to 3. I got this, and you're not physically distracted. You don't have your computer open and your cell phone, but how do you get in the right mindset to be an engaged listener?
So if you're like rushing from meeting to meeting or doing whatever, I'm going to point you back to that pause and some type of reset. So if it says, "Hey, Dave, can I talk with you?" And you're in the middle of even just walking down the hallway, yes, let's go sit down. Take that moment and actually intentionally focus on the other person. I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen to you. Or if someone picks up the phone and they're calling you and you know that it's important, perhaps during your drive is not the time to take that call. It's, hey, this is important. And I'm afraid that like I'm going to get distracted by what's on the road. Like, let's have it at another point, have the conversation at another point. And I think that all ties back to we react more than we respond. So many of my leaders are what I consider to be vending machine leaders. So someone comes to them and they put the quarter in and the leader's like, here's the answer. Here's the answer. And they just, because that's what got them where they are. And so what we have to work on is that actually when someone comes at you with the quarter, you need to pay attention to what's going on. You got to close the vending machine down and decide whether or not this is actually the moment to do that. And I think that's where you talk a lot about strategic communication. That's being strategic, is not just being immediately available and going right for it.
And I've learned this and failed at this of not providing the answer right away. Don't dispense what's in E1, because then they're just going to keep coming back to the vending machine, and then the solutions, the products are limited to only what you have in your vending machine. So if somebody comes with that quarter because they're hungry, maybe ask them how they're feeling and what they want. Maybe they have a better idea. But I've tried to change that so much, and it's difficult because you want to just provide an answer, but changing that mindset to put it on them.
Yeah, because that's actually leading, because you're teaching them to critically think and do the skill that they need to do. And I get it. It's like having a toddler. You have nephews, so you know this phenomenon when they have to get their shoes on and you're like, for the love, tie your shoe. You're washing them and they're like, and you want to scream and you want to help, but you're actually impairing them if you jump in and help, if you rescue every single time without even giving them an opportunity.
Right.
That's huge.
Yeah. And the active listening part. So I'm going to go back to my 6-year-old nephew who's, a storyteller, and he gets super excited, and he had Minecraft pajamas on the other day, and I don't understand the Minecraft. So I had to ask him, what is Minecraft? Thinking 30-second response. I got a 15-minute, I have no idea where the story went, but he was so excited to share it with me. But what's interesting is if you interrupt, right, then it's going to cause resistance. They're going to get frustrated, and you're probably going to condition them not to share like the second time. And the same thing happens, I know, on a much more serious conversation when we're doing like a trauma-informed interview with somebody who's experienced something terrible, or trying to recall an event, and you interrupt somebody halfway through because they're not getting to the point quick enough, or you think you know the rest of the story. and all of a sudden you've contaminated the rest of their memory, or they're not going to share it again. Does that translate, you think, to just one-to-ones and regular difficult conversations in the workspace?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it translates, because the minute that you predict, the minute that you interrupt, the minute that you tune out, right? That's it's like a tiny fracture of trust, because that person was talking, they were sharing information, and yes, you may feel like it's going on forever, but most of the time, most people don't talk for what, more than 2 or 3 minutes at a go.
Right. Well, you haven't met my nephews, but yeah, most
Well,
people.
okay, he's 6, and I'd
I'll
listen to
let them go. I'll let them roll. Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, take notes. Like, if
Yeah.
you really struggle, I mean, that's the other thing. If you really struggle listening to people, force yourself into an activity that makes you pay attention. Taking notes is, and I know some people think in the executive world, well, I can't have any notes. I don't want to, I've got AI. Great. That's wonderful. But also, the notes aren't necessarily for any other purpose than to keep you focused on the task at hand. But
I think note taking is huge. And I'll give you just kind of two examples. One, from an investigative standpoint, or just a conversation with somebody, it is so intuitive to interrupt somebody, right? Because if I'm asking, well, tell me where you were on Saturday, and I'm getting a story, and you say, well, I was probably at this, 123 Main Street for a while. And as soon as you said I was probably there,
it's the problem.
that causes me to say, okay, well, where else were you? Because when did you leave? But as soon as I interrupt you when you said probably, it's going to change the rest of your story. So I have to not interrupt you. I have to keep myself occupied, but also remember, I want to ask you a follow-up question later. So note taking is super important in the investigative space, but also making sure the person knows why you're taking notes. Because if I'm talking to you, and all of a sudden you said something, and I write it down, whether it's a job interview or an investigation, you start to think, uh-oh,
Yeah.
that must have been important what I just said. So I would say, and in that capacity, really important. And then the other, my best friend and I, well, if we're just one of us is telling a story or about whatever, something triggers like anybody would of, oh, I want to tell you a story. And so instead of interrupting each other, this is, again, feel like I'm 90 years old. We
Right.
forget what we're going to say. So now we have shared notes in our phone that I can put a keyword or write down whatever, apples. And it will remind me when he's done with his story, he say, hey, apples, what is that about? And it reminds me of the story that I wanted to tell him. But it's this note taking, keeping yourself occupied in a way, but then giving you a checkpoint later has been helpful in both contexts for me.
Well, and think about the impression that leaves with the other person, which shows them. So many of my leaders struggle with bonding and rapport, and showing, right, they get nabbed for not being empathetic is often the word that gets used. And so when you do those things that show that you're paying attention, I'm not even saying you have to care about so-and-so's dog, Skippy, that has a bum leg, and your direct report's telling you about it. Like, but the amount of, call it social capital or trust or rapport that you get from remembering that person has a dog named Skippy with a bum leg, that is, I cannot stress enough how important that is in a leadership role, to show people how much you care about them as a human being. Not that you care about their work output any less, but you care about them as a human. It will allow you then the opportunity to say harder things, because you've also put money in the bank.
Yeah. Let's expand on that, because I know you've mentioned this spectrum of empathy, or the difference between like empathy and sympathy and compassion and
Yes.
emotional intelligence, and all these things they're delivered in different ways. But I know there's leaders out there, I'm sure you interact. I'll just ask it to you. Do you
Yeah.
interact with people that say, I can't have empathy. This is a professional business. I'm here to get to the point, task driven.
Mhm.
We don't have time for that.
Yes.
What's your response to that
My
kind of?
response to that is typically a question like, well, how many more people do you want to lose?
Yeah.
Or how many more difficult meetings would you like to have? So I usually flip that one, because they've been told their often their entire careers about how they are perceived. So it really boils down to, do you want the same things happening over and over again, or are you ready to make a change? And then that makes the difference as to whether or not we work together. And some
Yeah.
people don't want to make that change, but it's really, to your point earlier, of getting people to think differently.
Yeah. And I think we've all worked for people in that spectrum. And I'm sure nobody like that's listening to this podcast because they're also
No,
open to
no.
wanting for self-improvement. I've worked for people that are like that. Like, they don't, not that they maybe don't care, but they're not the leader that you can go to and explain, here's why I'm late on this project. I had this terrible thing happen to me over the weekend. I've dealt with people that don't want to hear about it. I think what's more common that I've experienced is it depends on what's going on in their life, the urgency to other things going on is right. You have sometimes a leader who's like, okay, we got a scheduled one-to-one. We've got time to talk about life. But if it's that person's like, they're getting called from their boss, wondering why something's not done, and now it's falling down the hill here, and now they're calling, I think that's when we lose that structure of understand why that's important. So I don't know how much you see that, but it seems more like incident based than consistent behavior.
Yeah. So you're talking about the middle, right? That person who gets stuck in the middle, and how do they remember, or how do they make space for people's emotions when they are getting pressure to perform? And so, again, to me, the same rules apply. But what often gets missed is the expectation setting past that. So you can create space to be empathetic towards that person, but you're also working on a deadline. So, ensuring that that other person understands, I understand. And let me explain to you that, like, we are still on a deadline. So let's talk about that. And then what can I expect moving forward in terms of your ability to do this? What do you actually need? And I think that's the part that gets missed, because it goes back to clarity. We're not clear. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, the project isn't gonna happen, chaos, and the world explodes. It's like, okay, well, if it's not gonna be done today, where can we get clear on when it is gonna be done? So then I can go report that to the person. And again, you may have a person that's great, and you may not have a person that's great, and that's a whole different conversation. But what can you control is having a very clear conversation about what comes next.
So is there a simple, if I'm in a leadership role, or even you don't have to be in a leadership role, you can just be a colleague for somebody, but what is one or two simple things I can change today that I could show more appropriate empathy in conversations?
To show empathy more, listening, listening without fixing, or listening with validating. So many times the leaders that I work with feel like if they validate a feeling, that somehow means that they've given someone a pass or they're going to run wild. And I'm like, no, you can validate and set clear expectations. Yes, you are struggling right now, and I see that, and I'm going to help you. That's compassion. Um, and we have a job to do. So let's talk about the who, what, when, where, and why of how that's going to get done. So I think that's really important. And then how else can you show empathy? Ask questions.
Yeah.
Be
Question.
curious.
Yeah. Be curious and allow the answer to change your mind. I
Yes.
think I've seen that a lot where people ask questions because they're told to ask questions, and they're told to, it's like salespeople. And we've done a lot more, and I'm sure you've worked with some in that space too, but you work with somebody who's in sales or discovery, and it's, they think that they're an active listener and they're asking an open-ended question, but they've got their scripted 3 responses based off what that person says anyway.
Yeah.
That defeats the whole purpose of the question.
Well, if you go in, and I think this is important to be said, active listening, at least in the way that I defined it, is that I have no objective other than to understand you. When I think about what happens in sales is that they go in with a goal-oriented mindset of either I'm going to make this sale, I'm going to find your pain, I'm going to do, instead of just sitting back and letting it happen and then deciding whether or not it's even a good fit for the two of you to be together. And we know logically that like letting it happen is better, but emotionally we get so tied up because we're like, I want to make the sale and I want to win, or whatever your motivations are, that you have to really work hard to let like the detachment happen. So you can walk in and just listen to the other person.
For anybody that's listening that conducts interviews or an interrogation, if they want to call it, you just described exactly the problem. It's the same thing as people get so attached to a confession or the I did it or proving what they think they know versus, yeah, that'd be great, right? If you get that information, if you close the sale, wonderful. But if instead your goal is, how can I just learn more about something I don't know about? How can maybe there's other evidence that I haven't realized exists, or maybe this person's innocent, or maybe they're guilty of 4 other crimes that are related to this I was unaware of. But yeah, I think that is a very translatable takeaway
Yeah.
to the investigative space.
Flexible mindset is what popped into my head as you were talking. The
Flexible mindset. Yeah, tell me more. I like that.
Yeah. So it's like growth mindset, being flexible. Mental flexibility means that I'm able to not stay fixed in the black and white, yes or no. Right? If I have mental flexibility, I can see endless possibilities, and I'm willing to spend the time that it takes to pursue those, which is inherently not how our brain likes to work, by the way. Our brain likes, you know this, black and white, fill in the gaps. Let's get to the answer as quickly as possible. But if you can think about being as flexible and as imaginative as possible, right? I'm thinking about your investigators here. Like, what else could there be? Constantly asking yourself, what else could there be, and what else am I missing? Does someone see this differently? I mean, I'm sure, right? You all have to have people that give you perspective on how you are showing up. I think that kind of openness and ability to think in great big possibilities and, get other people's input is really the key in many workplaces for collaboration and successful outcomes. Like
Yeah.
we're looking for a successful meeting. You're looking for a successful interview.
Well, talking about how people show up, I know we talked a little bit about this, but the physical behavior and the way that we either present ourselves or the way that we're interpreting other people. And this is a topic I could go on and on and on about. So we can chat about it here a little bit. But there's so many people that put so much weight, and hey, that person, scratched their nose and blinked 3 times, so they're probably a liar, which we know is a problem. But I do think that there's something to how you show up yourself in a conversation. So I'll let you just kind of expand on that. And how much does that play into your workshops?
Yeah. I talk a lot about what is known as executive presence. I call it something different. I call it leadership presence, because not everyone I work with is an executive, and not every executive I work with is a leader. Right? Executive is a title, but the research really comes from Deborah Grunfeld. I don't know if you know her. She's through Stanford. And so talking about, right, the components of style and substance and character. And what I like about her work is she talks about that initial impression that people make. So when I talk to people about how they show up in a meeting, whether we like it or not, we do get those gut reactions. So people are judging you, at least according to her research, on your competence. So how well can you do your job? They're making that judgment within 100 milliseconds, which is less than a heartbeat.
Hmm.
So I always say people are not intending to do that. It's our natural state. And it, of course, goes back to caveman days, and our brains are more primal than we think they are. And so we have these immediate reactions. So I think my people get a lot of power in knowing that is that there are very small things that you can do. So you do show up in the way in which you intend. And so from a style perspective, that's how you hold yourself, the way you choose to dress based on your audience, the tone in which you speak, the words that you choose to use or not use. All of those things are really, really important and very like the low-hanging fruit to help people appear confident, because a lot of my folks don't necessarily feel confident. Right. And so then that will show up in their behavior. fidgety, looking down, rounded shoulders. I'm sitting on my phone. I struggle to answer a question. I'm using up talk, all of the things that we know do leave a poor impression on people. Where I think we get it wrong, especially in the body language realm, is, and I see this in sales, like the 93-7 rule. Have you ever heard of that?
Go ahead. Yes.
Right, which is right. So only 7% of what you communicate, or is your words. Right, that's where the importance lies. And that's the study that comes from was a very limited study based on emotional words and in a really strict context. So when people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter how what you say; it matters how you make people feel," and I'm like, "Well, it doesn't take long." The question I usually ask is, think about the worst thing that's ever been said to you. And then tell me that words don't matter.
Right.
Because you haven't forgotten it, because everybody in the room is like, Timmy called me a nerd.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that I know this 93-7 thing, we used to get asked about this all the time. And then if that was true, right? If it's only 7%, like language, and that means we should really be able to understand people who speak different languages a lot easier. Because if 93% of it is their body language and the tone, we should interpret it right away. And if that was the case, my Italian side of the family, everybody would think we're mad at each other all the time.
Yes. Oh, people. I tell a story about my husband all the time when I talk about body language, and I'm obviously an expressive speaker. I use a lot of gestures. I have a lot of animation, and so when we first got married, when I was making a point, I would go like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's like, "Can you please stop? I think you're going to hurt me."
So backhand is coming. Well, it's funny so I had the same thing. I talk with my hands all the time. And when earlier you were talking about when you present public speaking, like be yourself. And in the beginning, I was so, as a public speaker, you're trained not to do that. Like, do this stupid little steeple thing with your hands or hold something in your hands. And I tried to do that. My body still had this energy of like, I got to do something. And so that translated to me swaying back and forth, or me, like I look like an idiot. So now talk with my hands all the time because that's my style and that's when I'm confident and comfortable. But in an interview, I've had interviews where, we record an investigative conversation. We think electronic recording is helpful. It helps with note taking and transparency. And anyway, part of the problem is if you can't see me, you can still hear me, right? So if I'm interviewing and I'm talking with my hands and I've got and I'm doing this, which is me just tapping the desk as I'm talking, and it sounds like I am beating the table. So I think there's a lot there that you have to be careful of with how expressive we are, how it can be misinterpreted.
Context, right? Context matters. And you guys teach mirroring and matching. So when do you use that? When does that become helpful and when is it hurtful? So thinking about public speaking, one of the things that for my nervous speakers is, right, they'll fixate on that one face that looks flat. And then they'll start to mirror that face, and then they'll start to feel all the feels, and that person thinks I'm dumb and blah, 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 right? Like they'll generate the entire story. And so teaching people that actually when someone's interested in listening, they may not have any facial expression, that it's actually okay. And that reading a room, in my opinion, is often, yes, we can do that, but it's much more beneficial that if you see something and you're not sure what it means, ask. You may not ask in the middle of your talk, but you can certainly go to a person afterwards and be like, "Hey, like, what's happening?" An example I give all the time is I had a guy who was falling asleep in the back of the class. And of course, my initial thought is what? "Oh, I'm so boring. I'm the worst." He's dead asleep. There's like drool coming out the corner of his mouth. And I'm like, so I go up to him, at the break, and I was like, "Hey, is everything okay? Like, what's happening? I noticed you're sleeping." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, got a newborn." It's not you. Most of the time, whatever you're seeing out there isn't you. And if you do know, it's probably because you know the people really well. So in very tight-knit meetings, when we're talking about like leadership teams, of course, those people read differently because you know them better. And you know when Dave's bored.
Right.
Dave's frustrated because you can read it. But that takes time and that takes exposure.
Yeah, great example. I've done that I still do that every time I'm at doing a presentation or a keynote, and you get fixated on that one person who hasn't picked their head off their phone or whatever. And you think, okay, there's 500 people in here. There's one person who won't get off their computer. I'm terrible. They must hate me.
They
And then oftentimes that person's the one that's giving you the best review afterwards. And they had something else going on that triggered that. Or they're like, hey, sorry if I was on my computer. I was taking so many notes from what you shared. And so, yeah. And I got to go back to when you talk about mirroring and comparing that to like how we show up, because I think, we hear this in our training all the time is people get so focused on matching or mirroring somebody else's behavior and not realizing that's not just physical, it's also the attitude and the energy you enter the room with. And if you come into a presentation or a conference or a meeting and you're nervous and quiet and withdrawn and hesitant, you're probably not going to get any engagement from people because they're going to match that behavior. And so it can be uncomfortable sometimes, but I now really enjoy giving a keynote if the keynote presenter before me was dry and boring and terrible.
Yes.
I mean, I'm always rooting for everybody's success, but if you just want to place the opener right before me that's a little blah, I'll take it. Because you can just help shift the energy in the room and people pick up on that right away.
Well, and how empowering is that? So I talk to people all the time about how you own the energy in the room as the person, right? As the expert or as the leader, you get that energy. So whatever you decide to make that, like, you have that control. And I think for whatever reason, maybe it's, childhood speech class trauma. We think we don't have control over that, but you have way more than you think.
Yeah. I give this example in the class. I heard it on a radio show or something at some point. People were calling into the radio and talking about embarrassing moments at weddings that they'd been to. And this guy called in and shared that they're at a wedding or they're at the reception, and the bride and groom are at the front at the cake, doing the cake cutting little ceremony. And when they cut into the cake, the table that the cake was on was not like properly structured or whatever set up. And so the table collapses, the cake slides off, falls on the ground, smashes all over the place. And he talked about what happened immediately afterwards is the bride starts to cry. The groom started to go off on the catering people and like yelling. And so you can imagine how successful that relationship probably is now. But if imagine like being sitting there, you got 200 people watching this poor bride like break down emotionally. The groom is being a crazy person. Everybody's like, oh my God, what do we do? Like they stop looking at each other. The rest of the night's ruined. So I've used this example in the class because I thought, what if when that happened, the couple just started laughing?
Yeah.
Like 200 people will start laughing and it becomes probably the highlight of the joke of the night for the rest of their lives. But I think when you brought up like that beginning and the kickoff of the podcast, when you talked about this person asking you a question on stage that can be a little uncomfortable. I've had times where the PowerPoint, the laptop power shuts off, the projector stops working, the power is gone out, all these kind of things. Your reaction to that sets the tone for the rest of the room.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know how much that translates to a lot of what you're speaking about in your workshops and keynotes, but I feel like we forget how much we initiate the behavior we're about to get.
100%. That comes up all the time. Take it to hard conversations. If you walk in with the attitude that this is going to be horrible and miserable and everything's going to be a disaster and I'm going to wound this person so severely, right, all the head trash that comes up, it's going to be terrible. The chances are it's going to be terrible. Instead of saying, hey, I'm actually I've prepared well for this conversation. My intent is good. I've got clear examples. And then I'm going to also offer to help that person. I'm not just going to hand them the feedback and be like, see ya.
Right.
Hope you can fix that weird thing about yourself. Right?
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
Right?
I like that a lot because people are like we talked about before, people struggle so much with these like one-to-ones or giving reviews. But if you're a good leader and you put the time and energy, like I really care about this person, I want them to improve, I want this. And then if it still goes south, at least like, hey, I did this person right? I put the right time and energy into this. And but yeah, you enter with that thought of like, oh God, this is going to go terrible. They're going to hate me. Probably. Yeah.
You're going to give off that energy and they're going to pick up on that energy and they already know because it's the performance review or it's the, hey, can we talk? Which is like, just the best way to make sure people are neurotic. Who want to
Yeah.
stop the
Right.
thing and get fired? Put
Yeah.
a calendar invite. Like, can
Yeah.
we stop doing that to people? Please give them context.
Right. I have, I know we're up against it, so I'm only going to keep you for a few more minutes, but a couple more questions. But that last one you just shared, I went to a session once where this guy was explaining he learned this through arguments with his wife, is that before he ever asks a question now, he has they have a rule, statement before a question. And he brought up this example that I'm going to probably butcher this, but he's basically putting up Christmas lights at the house. And he was frustrated. It was one of those, projects that every time you put up the lights, they're all tied together and a light's broken and then the outlet's not working and, you're going crazy. And so he was stressed out. He's up and down on the ladder, not having a good day. And his wife comes in and says, "Why are you doing it that way?" So his immediate response, you can imagine. The reason she asked the question though, is because they had bought some device that helped them put the lights up where he wouldn't have to go up and down on the ladder. And he probably forgot that they had it. And so he said, if she would have started with a statement, "Hey, don't forget, we've got this tool we bought last weekend that'll help you. Why is there a reason you're doing it this way?" may not have been such a defensive response from him. But I thought that was a good takeaway of set the context for the question before you just pop it.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good.
I've learned it. I've not used it, but it's a great.
You're learning. We're learning.
Right.
Okay.
So my last couple of questions for you, it's kind of to that point, and you've been doing this for a little while, and you're doing speech pathology before, so you've always been surrounded by just the way people talk and listen and engage with each other. Is there anything that's kind of shocked you along the way that you've taken as a communication change for how you personally present yourself or engage in a conversation?
Shocked me. I think I've been exposed to a few people who have intentionally, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I think it's important when you know a lot about a communication not to weaponize it.
Mm.
And so I have one clear experience where it was with a coach actually, and I thought I don't know if you've ever had this happen where you're almost attracted to the opposite of everything you would ever do. And you're like, yeah, that's going to be the thing that's going to help me get to the next level. And what I discovered, right, it was that when people show you who they are, you have to believe them. And there was enough patterns of walking into a session and just being hammered. And it shocked me that people do that. That is real, because there's a part of me, I don't know, maybe it's because I didn't grow up playing football, but the mindset of coaching that says I'm going to break you down to build you up, that still exists, shocks me. And maybe it shouldn't, but it's I have yet to find very many people where that holds true. But I would love to know, you work with a much, right, with police force and that sort of thing. Is that real? Are there people who actually do better when you just wail on them?
No.
Okay, thank you. I was like, he's going to tell me yes, and I'm going to have to do a lot more learning.
No, I think there's a spectrum here, like anything. I think some people prefer more direct and blunt communication. Some people obviously prefer more empathetic communication. But when it comes down to gaining, when we talk about investigative interviewing, we would rather cooperation versus compliance. And so, what I mean by that is if somebody's in the room and they feel like the only way to appease you or the only way to leave that room is to be compliant with what you're asking, which means let me just tell them what they want to hear, which may or may not be accurate information. So this could be a witness, right? If somebody witnessed a crime and you keep asking them, what did the person look like? Are you sure? Do they have a beard? Are you sure they didn't have a beard? Do they have a scar on their face? Do they have a tattoo? Are you sure they didn't have a tattoo? If people are anxious, they want to get out of the room, they want to be helpful, being compliant would be I don't have any other choice but to be like, you know what? I think you're right. I think he did have a beard and I think he did have a tattoo on his right arm or whatever. I would rather cooperation, which is more allowing somebody the space and the autonomy to decide if and how they want to share the story. And so maybe it's less information, but it's going to be more reliable information. And so no, I think that translates across the board here. And it's the same in leadership. Like I don't want somebody to be on my team and get a project done just because they know they have to. I'd rather them kind of understand their role in it and how that impacts the company and the brand and what they get out of it. I think you're going to get more buy-in and a better product at the end of the day. So no,
Yeah.
I agree with you. I made you nervous for a second there, I think, but
Well,
yeah.
I think when you say it shocks me, to me, I feel like we've moved past that, Bobby Knight
Right.
version. If I say Bobby Knight, maybe I'm now making myself look
Just
ancient, but
throwing the chair across the
throwing the
basketball court.
chair.
Yeah.
And I've worked with women who talked about leaders who would throw staplers when they were mad, and I'm like, I don't think that gets, like, it's like what you said, it gets compliance, but it doesn't get cooperation, and compliance breeds resentment, I would imagine. Wait, like after, at least in my case, it did. I was like, I can't continue working with this person because I'm scared.
Yeah.
Like, it's not helping me think at all.
And now today's world, they're in the transfer portal, going to another college and getting that NIL money anyway, if they got to work for a coach like that.
That's right.
Last question. So my favorite like miscommunication story, and now I feel like nobody remembers this anymore either, but is the Abbott and Costello who's on first bit.
Vaguely, yes.
I mean, this, if you haven't, people, you need to watch this, but it's the who's on first, what's on second, I don't know, who's on third. It's this whole comedic bit on two people talking about the names of the players on a baseball team. And it's funny because it's so much miscommunication about something so simple. And so you've talked a lot today about clarity and about how we communicate. And so I don't know whether you have an example of a communication mistake or something that you've seen in your personal life or observed, or if you just have maybe one communication fix, one or whatever would help people that when they walk away with this, they think, okay, that's a good aha moment of what I need to think about next time I communicate. So I'm more clear.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take a pain that comes with almost every leadership team that I work with, which is we have the meeting and then we go on with our lives, and then we have the next meeting and nothing has happened or very little has happened. And it sounds so basic, but slow down. And at the end of the meeting, decide who, what, when, where. Maybe the why. The why should have been clearly established during the meeting. Sometimes it bears repeating, though, just to help people. But like, to me, that's such a simple thing to do, and yet we forget it because either A, if you're like me, I'm like, I'll remember it. I have an awesome memory, which I don't. I have a very human memory. Or, people are confused and they think that agreement has happened and they think that assignment has happened, but we haven't taken that extra step to really clarify it because, at least, again, sometimes culturally, if we repeat things, that's viewed as being, oh, you can't repeat it. Like, I'm talking down to them. No, you're clarifying, and that clarifying is going to save you time down the road. And even if you do feel a little bit weird about it, don't you want to save time down the road? So that's my tip for clarity at the end of a meeting.
Yeah, I think that's good. That brings me back to the example, as silly as it is, talking about kids learning how to listen. And yeah, the amount of times I feel like I could tell my nephews something and you feel like they understood it, but then the action is completely different. And it's not because they're intentionally doing it wrong. It's the way they interpreted what you just said. And so, yeah, as a leader, sometimes I've learned this in training classes or just giving project assignments, is that the end result's not what you envision. And it's because they saw something different from what you said. So having that checkpoint, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah.
We're going to list a bunch of links in our show notes, but for people to learn more about you, I know you got a great website and your company, Practically Speaking, but tell me a little bit more about where people can find you, and
Sure.
then what are some of the services you provide.
Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Alex Perry, Practically Speaking. So I'm really easy to find there. I'm pretty active there. My website is pswithalex.com. I'm on Instagram. at PS with Alex, you're going to notice a theme here of simplicity.
Yeah.
And then you're always welcome to reach out. I'll give you my cell and I'll give you my email. And if you ever want to chat, I'm happy to talk.
No, I think it's great. And we only scratched the surface of some of the things I know that you focus on. So we'll link that in the show notes. I encourage people to go click. And you're going to have to re-listen to the podcast because people probably stopped listening for moments. Like we talked about, they're trying to multitask, they're trying to drive, go on the treadmill.
Watches.
Right. But I'm just going to leave people with, I like this on your website. It says, as companies grow, communication problems grow with them. And that just hit home because our company's been around for 44 years. We train communication. That's allegedly our expertise. But as we continue to grow, that's when you really have to rely on this foundational structure of how do we communicate with each other. So that just hit home with me. And I know you got a lot of really neat stuff on the website and some other programs and workshops and keynotes that you do. So I encourage people to go check that out.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave.
Absolutely. Thanks for spending time with me today. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told.
To help more listeners find our show, please provide us a rating, give us a follow, and share this episode with your colleagues. For the latest news and to engage with our guests, follow Truth Be Told on your favorite social media apps. And don't forget, we are available on all major platforms, including Apple, Spotify, and watch a video of this episode on YouTube. On behalf of our guests and valued sponsors, thanks again for listening to this episode of Truth Be Told.